I apologizing for being a bit late. We needed to check all of the connections, and this gives me the opportunity to thank all of the technical team who are behind the screens. For everybody to understand, there's about 5 people working right now to make this running. So this gives us an opportunity to thank all of the technical team, and in particularly our friends from the Geneva Environmental Network, who are huge support and without who this would not be possible. So today, at the third day of the Geneva Toxic-Free Talks, we have the pleasure to focus on the reports which have been presented by the UN Special Rapporteur, Professor Orellana, to the current session of the Human Rights Council. The first report we will be talking about right now is a report that is considered as a country visit, or to be more exact, this time it would be an organization visit, which means that special procedures can not only visit countries, normally about 2 countries per year, but can also do visits to international organizations. And here we have a really excellent opportunity for the Human Rights Council to establish a first contact with the International Maritime Organization, who is actually so important for the structure of the global system, but also in our daily life. What we're doing right now, and all of the technical connections we had to check just before starting, all of them are actually possible through all of the physical exchanges, which most of them have been shipped through the international shipping system. So the IMO is a really important and crucial international organization. So we're very happy to have the opportunity now to talk about how the IMO deals with human rights issues, how can the human rights system support better the work in this field. And in order to start our discussion, I'll immediately give the floor to the Special Rapporteur, Professor Marcos Orellana, who just presented his country visit to the Human Rights Council. Marcos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yves, and thank you once again. I would like to start by thanking the Geneva Environment Network and Earth Justice for co-organizing these Geneva Toxic-Free Talks, which gives us an opportunity to get into further detail and further depth into various issues that are concerning toxics and human rights. As Yves mentioned, I had the opportunity to conduct an organization visit to the International Maritime Organization. It started back in 2020 when in-person visits and travel was not possible, and it started with online meetings. And then I had an opportunity to visit headquarters earlier in January of this year. I wish to first of all thank the welcome that I received from the organization, the constructive engagement. I want to highlight that because it led to very fruitful conversations. How did this visit come about? What was in the inception, very early on in my mandate? You may recall, as the delegate of Mauritius pointed out during the interactive dialogue on Tuesday after my report, that the Wakashio, the vessel, hit the island of Mauritius, spilling an inordinate amount of fuel oil and damaging coastline and depriving a number of people from their livelihoods. I was at the time then receiving information and requests for intervention by people in Mauritius and others. It became very clear to me very quickly that the human rights community, generally speaking, does not have much information on what the IMO does and the relevance of IMO instruments for the enjoyment of human rights. There are organizations, certainly in the environmental movement, that have followed IMO work and engaged the IMO for a good number of years on various issues. But again, largely speaking, that is not the case with the human rights community. And it's a two-way street. Conversely, the shipping industry does not, for many years, has not had much interest in what the human rights field may do or not in respect of its work. But of course, human rights have been relevant for shipping on a number of issues. The oil spill experience and situation of the Wakashio is only the latest or in the series of very dramatic oil spills and other spills that impact on coastlines and impact on people. Oil spills have been reduced significantly, but they remain a major source of concern. But it's not only catastrophic accidents like oil spills that capture the headlines, it's operational pollution, everyday pollution of the air through the burning combustion of heavy fuel oil. So people that live in port cities, people that live in cities crossed by straits, they're enduring those issues as well. There's issues of hazardous cargo, chemicals for sure, noxious substances, but as the recent experience of Sri Lanka can attest, with the sinking and then the fire of the Express Pearl and the plastic nurdles that littered Sri Lankan coast, plastic pellets, how are they dealt with? So this is a question about hazardous cargo. The blast in Beirut also put a question about the transport of hazardous cargo. That is an issue concerning management at port. So in a way, it's the place where the sea and the land kind of connect. Sometimes these fall through the cracks. The IMO has involved at times in some of these issues, for example, on port reception facilities to deal with the waste from vessels and in that way enable cleaner shipping. And of course, I wish to mention shipbreaking or ship dismantling, ship recycling. The terminology varies. And I believe we're going to get into further detail on that. As Yves, you mentioned, the global economy functions because of shipping. It's more than 90% of international traded goods that are traded as seaborne vessels. And IMO regulations, IMO is the regulator for this activity. There are 50 plus treaties in force or have been concluded to regulate this, but often the capacity for enforcement is lacking, and that's where issues of flags of convenience, the terminology is contested and controversial. Some would say open registries, but flags of convenience referring to countries that do not have either the will or the capacity to enforce the treaties that they become a party to. The IMO is also dealing with that through an innovative audit scheme that is looking at compliance, and there's a lot of lessons that I believe can be drawn from that audit scheme to the field of international environmental law. There's so much more that could be said, and I am really delighted to join this panel of experts to learn more about what the IMO is doing, and also what are some of the frontiers, what it should be doing, and some of the gaps that should be addressed as well. So with that, those opening remarks, I want to once again thank the IMO for the hospitality, for the engagement. I also want to thank all the civil society organizations, academic. I also had dedicated consultations with the private sector, the shipping industry, all the submissions received. All of that went into this organization visit report, which I must say has been one of the conceptually, intellectually most challenging intellectual endeavors that so far has come up in the mandate. So this is, I'm really pleased to be here with you today. Thank you. 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Special Rapporteur. And we're very happy now to hear the IMO reaction and the IMO comments on the report. We have with us Mr. Changbing Huang. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Mr. Huang, are you with us?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Can you hear me?
Okay, thank you. Great. So we're connecting you, and we're trying to have your slides too. So, Mr. Huang, you are the Deputy Director of the Division for Protective Measures, Marine Environment of the IMO. And so we're really delighted to have you with us. Thank you for this dialogue. It's, as I said before, not usual here in the Human Rights Council to have this opportunity to talk with the IMO. So we're really very happy to hear you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator, again, and good morning, everyone, and a greeting from London. First of all, I wish to thank the Special Rapporteur and the host to invite the International Maritime Organization to speak at this side event. I also wish to express our appreciation to the Special Rapporteur for his comprehensive report. As mentioned by our head of delegation in the plenary on Tuesday, IMO welcomes the recommendations and conclusions of the report, which will be communicated to the Council of the Member States of the IMO to consider and decide how to address such recommendations in accordance with the established IMO process. The report of the Special Rapporteur has provided a detailed overview of the IMO's work, so in the following I will give you an update, in particular on the adoption of the IMO 2023 GHG reduction strategy, the entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention in 2025, the celebration of the 50 years of MARPOL at IMO, as well as the new strategic direction on human elements. For over a decade now, IMO has acting to reduce GHG emissions from international shipping. There can be no doubt that one of the most important achievements of IMO's work is the adoption of the 2023 IMO strategy on reduction of the GHG emissions from ships in July this year. The 2023 IMO GHG strategy includes an enhanced ambition to reach net zero GHG emissions from international shipping close to 2050, a commitment to ensure the update of the alternative zero and near zero fuels to represent at least 5, striving for 10 of the energy used by international shipping by 2030. As well as checkpoints reduce the total annual GHG emission by at least 20, striving for 30 by 2030, and at least 70%, striving for 80% by 2040, comparing to 2008. The adoption of the 2023 strategy is just the first step. The IMO member states have agreed to adopt by 2025 a basket of technical and economic GHG reduction measures, and in parallel we have started the work on the safety aspect of this transition, from the renewable fuel being developed to the required training to our seafarers. A comprehensive impact assessment has been initiated with a view to addressing any disproportionate negative impacts from the measure on the state, including developing states, in particular SIDS and LDCs. The Special Rapporteur in his report referred to the Hong Kong Convention on ship recycling. I'm very pleased to inform that the entry into force condition for the Hong Kong Convention had been met, and the convention will take effect from 26 June 2025. This will open a new phase for the global implementation of the convention and create the opportunity to introduce amendments and improvements to the convention based on the experience gained and the lesson learned. The IMO has been making all the efforts in promoting the convention, and one of the examples is the successful ship recycling technical assistance project in Bangladesh, which leads to the ratification of the convention by Bangladesh in June this year. As you may be aware that IMO, the World Maritime theme for 2023 is MARPOL at 50. our commitment goes on. There are serious events being held in IMO to reflect the organization's long history of protecting the environment from the impact of ships via a robust regulatory framework and emphasize its ongoing commitment to important work. Just to highlight a few achievements, statistics show a 90% in the number of major oil spill reduction and a 100-fold reduction in the volume of the oil spills. A global framework for international cooperation on pollution preparedness and response has been established. The implementation of a global limit of 0.5 sulfur content in fuel oil used on board ships brings significant benefits for both human health and environment. Under MARPOL Annex 5, a prohibition applied to the discharge of all types of garbage, including all plastics, into sea from ships. The IMO adopts the action plan to address marine plastic litter from ships to contribute to the global solution for preventing marine plastic litter entering the oceans through the ship-based activity. The IMO addresses human rights under its human elements components, which is also one of the strategic directions of the organization. In addressing human elements-related issues, IMO takes into consideration new technologies and alternative fuels, human-centered design principles, safe manning, drills and exercises, fatigue management, operational safety, security, and environment protection, among others. IMO promotes fair treatment of seafarers, gender equality, and the empowerment of women, and address seafarers' abandonment, bullying, and harassment. Before I conclude, I wish to once again thank the Special Rapporteur for his comprehensive reports and the recommendations. The IMO is looking forward to work together with all the UN and all the specialized agencies from human rights aspect, and we welcome the report accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huang, and this is a very interesting presentation of some of the achievements of the IMO and also what are the instruments with which you are working. So we're very happy to become more familiar with these different elements and work streams of your organization. Thank you very much for that. So now we have the privilege to have a number of experts of different elements linked to the shipping industry and to its human rights challenges. And I'll start immediately with Mrs. Susan Wingfield. Mrs. Wingfield, you're program officer at the Secretariat of the Triple Convention of Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm on waste, prior informed consent, and on POP, the persistent organic pollutant. And so very important conventions directly linked to what we have just been hearing from the IMO. So what is your take on that? Mrs. Wingfield, the floor is yours. You can just push on the red button. Yeah. There it is.
There we go. I see. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eve, and thank you both to the Earth Justice for organizing this event and of course, the Special Rapporteur for his report and for the IMO for their response. I'm just checking, do I have any slides or? No. Okay, don't worry. So I'll just give a quick overview of what the BRS conventions or Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm conventions are and seek to do. Well, these are really the global agreements or multilateral environmental agreements on chemicals and waste. So dealing with the life cycle of chemicals and then at the waste stage through the Basel Convention. Mindful of time, I'll just jump ahead. We do have quite a lot of involvement with the International Maritime Organization on a number of different issues. Bing has mentioned MARPOL, the Convention on Pollution Prevention, which, for those of you who may know the Basel Convention, actually waste from normal operations of ships, for example, is excluded from the Basel Convention. So we have worked closely with IMO in the past as that is under their remit through MARPOL. The Special Rapporteur mentioned the issue of the sea-land interface at ports. That's something we've also worked with IMO on, particularly after the Probo Koala incident a number of years ago, where there was an issue of waste dumping in Côte d'Ivoire. And we worked extensively with IMO to develop a guidance manual on improving this sea-land interface. So really, after the ship discharges its waste at port reception facilities, the linkage to environmentally sound management downstream. And of course, IMO has its own port reception facility in that manual in that regard. Also, the London Convention and Protocol are relevant. We've worked with that part of the IMO in relation to abandonment of ships. It's one issue. And then also sea-based sources of plastic waste. Plastic waste being quite an important issue under the Basel Convention agenda these days. And lastly, which I'll focus a bit more on, is the Hong Kong Convention for the safe and environmentally sound recycling of ships. This is probably one of the closest areas of cooperation. Tian just mentioned the SenseRec project, which we have been engaged in over the years with IMO, particularly with regard to the downstream management of waste coming from ship recycling. But also it was mentioned that the Basel Convention, of course, is applicable to ships going for recycling. Now, the Basel Convention wasn't necessarily developed with the realities of maritime transport in mind. Therefore, it is perhaps the case where it can be circumnavigated, pardon the pun, in terms of the state-to-state notification structure or prior informed consent procedure, which we have seen happening in real life. The issue is, of course, the flag state system within the IMO. So we have worked with the IMO Secretariat and governments towards the Hong Kong Convention, which was actually negotiated many years ago and adopted in 2009. But as was mentioned by both IMO and the Special Rapporteur, it's only recently that we have reached the entry into force requirements for the Hong Kong Convention. So this raises an issue with respect to the Basel Convention, whereby our parties may now decide to discuss whether there is an equivalent level of control between the Basel Convention and the Hong Kong Convention. Potentially too, this is by no means something that will necessarily absolutely happen, but it could be that ship dismantling is excluded from the Basel Convention in the future. It's for parties to decide. But certainly how the two conventions will interact together is something that we anticipate will be a discussion moving forward. But looking to issues impacting the application of a human rights-based approach, I think what we've really seen from the IMO and all of the issues that it deals with is that, occupational safety and health is key, environmental issues are key, human rights-based approach is of course key. This is very apparent in, for example, conventions like safety of life at sea, which relates to seafarers, of course, and other issues impacting safety of life at sea. But perhaps it's not explicitly mentioned in certain conventions, and I can say from the Hong Kong Convention perspective, there isn't any specific mention of a human rights-based approach with regard to ship recycling. In the issues beyond the Hong Kong Convention, and reasons for this are, ship recycling is focused in the South Asian community, in an area where there may be weak legal frameworks and poor enforcement of those frameworks. In some cases, it is the informal economy. Indeed, it was only the case in Bangladesh, I'd say going back 10 or 15 years, that ship recycling was actually formalized as an industry. Of course, we know when an industry is informal that, you know, it's very difficult to apply certain rules to that industry. I've mentioned the ownership structure with regards to the flag states and the realities of maritime shipping. And really, when it comes to ship recycling, often the operations are tied to competitiveness and profitability. So the ship owner on one side is looking to send the ship to the place where they will get the best price for that ship. And conversely, the yard is looking to minimize its costs in terms of profitability. And as I've mentioned, in general, there are a lot of safety and health and environment issues related to ship recycling. So this has probably impacted this true human rights approach. My last slide, I promise. So what can be done really moving forward? Well, I've already mentioned the interaction between the Basel Convention and Hong Kong Convention. This is specifically related to waste and environment, but of course, human rights, occupational safety and health come in there as well, and ensuring a robust regime between the two conventions is going to be key. In addition, Hong Kong Convention entering into force in 2025, this will give the member states, the parties that have ratified, the opportunity to review what has been done in terms of the convention and guidelines, assess whether there are going to be any needs for amendments or updates, and introduction, for example, of aspects such as a human rights-based approach. I do think it's important to recognise good practices. There are, of course, difficulties associated with the beaching method of ship recycling. Having said this, there are facilities in both India and Bangladesh that should be recognised for taking steps to really improve their practices. Another important thing is going to be the transparency in terms of the ship owners' operations and also stakeholder inclusion in the ship recycling countries. I just want to mention quickly these guiding principles on business and human rights, which of course are not legally binding, but certainly ship owners and that industry should be adhering to those principles. And that of course ESG exercises, monitoring and reporting need to be authentic exercises. Just lastly, I'd like to end with some thoughts around just transition. I know my next speaker well, and I know that the NGO platform has worked tirelessly to really move this activity off the beaches. And I think we can all say that, you know, in a longer term, that we really hope that that would be the case. But a real issue in terms of human rights that I'm curious about the thoughts of the NGO platform on this particular issue is the just transition of those workers involved, or you know, deriving a living from the ship recycling or breaking industry in the ship recycling countries. So I'd be interested to hear her thoughts on that. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't take too much time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Susan. Yes, well, we are going to go straight to the next speaker then, Ingvild Jensen. Ingvild, you're the founder and the director of the NGO Shipbreaking Platform, one of the main leading organizations on this issue at the global level. And we just heard very briefly from Susan a small description of what's happening on the ground. It was also there was also a reference by the Special Rapporteur, and the mandate itself have worked already several times on the question of shipbreaking. So we're very happy to hear what you can say about your experience working with the workers who are directly affected by that in the field, but also your views on what has been said about the links between the Basel Convention and the Hong Kong Convention, because there are, of course, a lot of human rights aspects linked in this discussion, and that needs to be taken very, very seriously. So, Ingvild, thank you very much for being with us, and I'm very happy to give you the floor right away.
Thank you, Yves. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Just had one slide to share, which Can you see? Can you see the slide now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eve, and thank you for the invitation to join this discussion. Thank you to the Special Rapporteur for the report, the response of the IMO, and Susan for making this transition to the work of the NGO Shipbreaking Platform. For those of you who don't know us, we're a coalition of human rights and environmental NGOs, also based in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, where most of the shipbreaking practices currently take place, and we have been active in both the Basel context, but also at the IMO when the Hong Kong Convention was being negotiated, with several proposals on how to make sure that the IMO addresses this issue properly. But before maybe answering Susan's question, I would just like to draw attention to what we call externalizing costs, and this is at the root of the problem of the current practices of shipbreaking. We, as an NGO, monitor all vessels that end up being scrapped. We try and identify the companies that own these vessels, and as you can see from this picture, the blue dots are where the vessels are coming from. So these are the companies that own the vessels and sell them for scrap, and the orange dots are where they end up. And the vast majority, 90% of the world's tonnage, is still broken down on only 3 beaches in the world, one in Pakistan, one in India, and one in Bangladesh. The practices there, we also track accidents. There are many accidents related to explosions, falling steel plates, due to the lack of proper infrastructure to manage these massive vessels and dangerous practices of taking them apart. There are also many workers that become sick many years after having worked at these facilities due to exposure of toxic fumes, toxic materials. And the World Bank in 2010 estimated that, for example, Bangladesh, through a 20-year period before 2030, would have imported 79,000 tons of asbestos, 240,000 tons of PCB containing materials, 69,000 tons of paints containing heavy metals through the imports of end-of-life vessels. And just to remind the participants, these vessels originate from the blue dots. So they come from Europe, East Asia, and the US primarily. And it is our view that it is the responsibility of these companies to ensure that their end-of-life management is conducted in a way that it does not harm workers nor the environment. Just wanted to share one picture from Bangladesh last year. Whilst, as Susan said, there have been some improvements in some facilities, the vast majority of shipbreaking in Bangladesh looks like this. And this is from last year. It also affects the villages behind. So here you can see there's been flooding and oil spills flowing over to the populations who live just behind. So this activity is causing, still causing harm to local communities, livelihoods, and the environment. And we believe that the Basel Convention still has a very important role to play on this issue, as the Hong Kong Convention unfortunately stops at the gate of the facility. So it does not look at how these hazardous materials contained in vessels are actually managed. So we're potentially looking at a double regime, but I'm happy to see that the IMO is also seeing that there is an opportunity to actually amend the Hong Kong Convention. And I think there are many ways to improve the convention and improve the standard that it sets for ship recycling. We believe that the beaching method in itself has inherent flaws and does not allow for safe nor environmentally sound management of the facilities. It is a method that is banned in all the countries from where the vessels originate. So there shouldn't be a double standard in the sense that we allow it in South Asia, but not in Europe, not in the US, not in China. So that would be one of our really first key recommendations to the IMO, to look at the standard and have a level playing field that goes up. Susan said, well, the transition of the workers. I think India landed on the moon just a couple of weeks ago. There's no reason why vessels could not be dismantled using an industrial platform, heavy lifting cranes in India when they have the technical capacity to land on the moon. And there surely is also technical expertise within the shipping industry to bring best practice to all parts of the world. So that would be one of our first recommendations for the IMO, to really look at the standard itself for ship recycling and ramp it up. It was also mentioned by the Special Rapporteur that there are certain concerns with the way the IMO or shipping is regulated through a flag state regime. And some of our observations with regards to shipbreaking is that there are certain flags that are very popular at end of life, such as St. Kitts and Nevis, Palau, Comoros. These are flags that are black or grey listed by the Paris MOU, so in port states globally. They're known for the poor implementation of international maritime law, and the vast majority of the vessels that end up in South Asia are sailing under these flags and have changed to these flags just weeks before hitting the beaches. This is linked to a model where ship owners sell to scrap dealers, middlemen known as cash buyers, that change the flag. And this is also one issue that we would really encourage the IMO to take seriously in order to ensure that there are responsible flag registries implementing the Hong Kong Convention. I'll leave it to there, and happy to take any questions later on.
Thank you very much, Ingvild. That was very, very precise and very clear elements. You've just raised an issue for IMO. Let me say that we'll give the floor back to IMO. And just before the final comment of the Special Rapporteur at the end of the different presentation. But so, Mr. Huang, I'll be coming back to you if you want to answer to some of these elements. Well, as it said, and we saw from the map that Asia is a very important actor in the field of shipping due to the number of ports and harbors, and also to the volume of goods which are coming from Asia, and which means that you have a very important shipping activity over there. So we're very happy to have with us now Professor Liu Huang. Professor Liu Huang, you're a specialist of labor relations and also of the shipping industry in the Asian region. And you're also active with the Center for Socioeconomic Development, CSED. We're very happy to have you with us, and we're very happy also to hear what is your take of what you just heard, and also of the report of the Special Rapporteur. The floor is yours.
Thank you,
yes.
Chair. So thank you for having me in the public discussion forum. As my research has been focusing on sustainable distillwater fishing, so I think my contribution would like to extend a little bit, so human toxic and human rights at sea, but thinking about just transition for distillwater fishing vessels. So I would like to, before I starting to share a story from my interviewee, Mr. Kong, a small-scale vessel owner and also a fisher, maybe I should first introduce a little bit the fishing vessels in Asian regions. So according to the FAO report in 2022, we can estimate, here you can see a huge distribution of around 65% of total fishing vessels in Asia. So that take a great part, as the total is around 400 point something, and in Asia that would take around 2.68 million of fishing vessels. So regarding to the challenges behind the distant water fisheries, so we can see as a small-scale vessel owner or a fisherman that live on the vessel, but probably he can hire a number of migrant workers. That is the common situation in East Asia and also in Southeast Asian countries. So first is the decreasing fishing stock, as we see in many oceans. And second challenge is about the limited quota of tuna, which it is with high value, high economic value species. And in addition, I think during the COVID pandemic period, so the huge increase of oil price, and also the pressure from the market, where that the vessel have to sell their capture in an immediate way in order to receive the cash to pay for the fishers. Another challenge is about the floating exchange rate, which of course enforce this kind of export pressures. I think another challenge coming from the social dimension, when we're talking about more Asian countries, they adopt stricter labor and environmental standards, which applies to all scale vessels. So not only the big vessel, and also including small vessels, by definition, is less than 100 tons of weight. And moreover, the impacts of ILO core conventions like Convention on Forced Labor and Convention 188 work in fishing enforcement also, I think, make the working conditions with more protection for workers. So as a sole vessel owner for Mr. Kong, I think he just have two options. So the scenario one is either if he got to face his over-indebted business, but where should he go if he can have another option? So for scenario one, keep fishing, keep support, bear the burden of over-indebtedness, but probably he will be entrapped in IUU fishing. And in order to save labor costs, he might get involved with abusing working conditions to save labor costs, or at the end, he might face an unaffordable penalty by the fishing authority as the end. Another scenario might be, okay, since distwater fishing maybe is the playground only for bigger fishing vessels. So how about the small scale? Is it the end of a career and need to another transition? But when we're talking about transition, then first coming to how to solve the problem for the FRP vessels, because we all know that more and more, especially small vessels, are made with FRP material. So how to manage the end-of-life fiber reinforced plastic vessels? There are some ways: burning the vessel, or landfilling, or at sea disposal. But as IMO made an excellent report on this issue, and I quote, especially it's really particularly difficult for small island developing states, since there is space being a significant issue and disposal at sea having wider implications for the marine community on which people may be dependent, and possible pathways to humans for plastics and associated pollutants. So here comes about my next slide. So for Mr. Kong, he's not unique. So I think he's just among hundreds of thousands of small-scale vessels owners and fishers. So I'm talking about just transition for these kind of vessel and the fishers. As I quote in the field visit, so that is his statement and his question: business and human rights. But without businesses, where do we enforce human rights? To my investigation, so for small-scale vessel owners and fishers, they are the base of fishing supply chain. I mean, the global fishing supply chain, where they can have less voice because they are short of negotiation power, not like the big-scale vessels. And they are least organized as they spend most of their time at sea. So when we are talking about just transition, I think we have to think about not only for one dimension or one or a single phase. Just transition needs to be applied within a global supply chain context as a fishing industry, and should be equipped with multi-phase concerns. And I'm so glad today I can hear about the Basel Convention and the Hong Kong Convention. When we're talking about the solution of cycling and waste disposal, and maybe that would be a new hope for these kind of FRP vessels. So
yes.
Here I come to my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and we wanted to have your contribution because we were very often just focused on the big shipping industry, and you have all these other aspects which needs to be taken into consideration. So thank you very much for this very, very impressive presentation of what's happening on the ground. It's a very good illustration of the issues around just transition. Let me turn now, as time is running short, immediately to Mrs. Julia Bleckner from Human Rights Watch, from the Asia Division and the Global Health Initiative. Human Rights has been monitoring these issues very closely, so I'll immediately give you the floor, Julia, for your contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to reflect on Special Rapporteur Oriana's important report. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Please, go on.
I am here speaking on behalf of Human Rights Watch. In order to underscore the rapporteur's findings on the need for a human rights approach at the IMO, I'll speak briefly on the findings of a forthcoming Human Rights Watch report on the harms of shipbreaking in Bangladesh. We interviewed dozens of shipbreaking workers in Bangladesh who described abusive and dangerous working conditions. The International Labour Organization has described shipbreaking as one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Yet workers in Bangladesh consistently told us that they're not provided with adequate protective equipment, training, or infrastructure. Workers described using their socks as gloves to avoid burning their hands as they cut through molten steel, wrapped their shirts around their mouths to avoid inhaling toxic fumes, and carrying chunks of steel across the sand barefoot. They described injuries falling from falling pieces of the ship, or being trapped inside when a ship was caught on fire or pipes exploded. Since virtually all shipbreaking in Bangladesh is done by the beaching method, the work site itself is full of hazards, and toxic waste is dumped directly into the sand and the sea. Because the work is done on the beach, the shipyards are generally inaccessible for emergency vehicles, meaning that in case of injury, workers are forced to carry their injured coworkers from the beach to the road in their arms, and find a private vehicle to take them to a hospital. The IMO could play an important role in preventing the abuses that we found in Bangladesh by regulating and enforcing environmental and labor protections in the shipbreaking industry. However, we're concerned that the outside influence of certain flag states at the IMO limits its ability to act as an effective regulator. Because flags of convenience are up for sale and decisions at the IMO are weighted by the representation of the world fleet, we're concerned that the shipping industry can influence important regulations regarding labor, health, human rights, and environmental protections, essentially by buying flags and thus influence at the IMO. As my colleague from the NGO Shipbreaking Platform noted, we're concerned that such influence has weakened the ability of the Hong Kong Convention to protect against the abuses and environmental damage that we found in Bangladesh. The convention does not ban or even discourage the beaching method, and as a special rapporteur notes in his report, it does not ban the movement of ships containing hazardous materials to places where such waste could not be handled in an environmentally sound way. The convention also makes it easy to approve substandard yards and relegates assessments to local authorities without independent oversight. The Hong Kong Convention should be strengthened to effectively regulate the industry, and countries should continue to adhere to existing international labor and environmental laws regulating the disposal of ships, including the Basel Convention. It is our hope that the IMO will undertake the Special Rapporteur's recommendations in order to institutionalize a transparent and human rights-based approach in order to ensure that the lives of those most vulnerable in the shipping industry are protected and their rights are respected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. And due to the time limits, I'll immediately turn to Mrs. Lucy Gilliam, who is the Senior Shipping Policy Officer at Seas at Risk. The floor is yours, Lucy.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I'm Dr. Lucy Gilliam, and I speak on behalf of Seas at Risk, a Brussels-based NGO with members across Europe. We are members of the Clean Shipping Coalition, and we have observer status at the International Maritime Organization, and we work on all aspects of shipping pollution. We recently published a report called The State of Shipping and Oceans, which details all the ways that shipping pollutes the marine environment, from climate and air pollution to toxics, chemicals, plastic pollution like pellets, container loss, all of which are harming biodiversity and the intricate web of life in the oceans. So while the IMO is to be commended on the agreement of many instruments to deal with ship pollution, the reality on the water is somewhat different. Oil spills from shipping are still a regular occurrence. We see this from satellite monitoring. The sulfur cap in 2020 is goal-based, so it includes a compliance method of using exhaust gas cleaning systems, aka scrubbers, that basically remove sulfur from the exhaust but immediately transfer it to the ocean, which we think contravenes UNCLOS. The greenhouse gas agreement agreed this summer, while better than the previous agreement, is not aligned with a 1.5 degree pathway, and limiting heating to below 1.5 degrees is critical to protect polar regions and low-lying island states and communities. This summer, a marine biologist and climate advocate from Mauritius, Shama Sandeo, was hosted on the Clean Shipping Coalition during the Marine Environment Protection Committee. 3 years ago, the bulk carrier MV Wakashio stranded on the reefs of Mauritius and spilled 1,000 tons of oil. Today, she told us that lives are still destroyed. Many have health problems. They cannot eat the seafood. They're struggling to make ends meet. Many can't send their kids to school. And there have been many vessels stranded in Mauritian waters. Some are still there. So while these accidents happen, there's rarely full and timely accident reports. In the case of Wakashio, there were a lot of unanswered questions and some very bizarre things happening, including a representative from the Oil Pollution Inspection Committee saying that no risks from heavy fuel oil, it's just like skin cream. This was actually seen on television. The communities impacted haven't had the resources to properly clean the environment nor cover their costs. The system currently protects the polluters at the expense of people in the environment. We all have the human right to a clean environment, but rarely do we have this anymore. Our lungs are colonized by air pollution, water's polluted with chemicals and plastics. The poles are melting at unprecedented rates, removing entire ecosystems that indigenous communities depend on, and islands are disappearing into the sea from climate change. The IMO must fully acknowledge human rights in all aspects of negotiations. I was horrified to hear a delegate say during climate negotiations that human rights should not be part of the principles agreed in the climate negotiations. Unfortunately, I'm not permitted to say which country because of the rules of the IMO. So I also say we need more transparency, because how can such things be considered reasonable to say from the floor of a UN fora? Clearly, there's a need for a mindset shift from those that represent all of us at the United Nations in these negotiations. We also need to see more Indigenous communities represented in observers. Currently, there's only one observer representing Indigenous communities, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and they were actually only admitted last year. I also agree with the speaker from CSEND that we need a wider, full supply chain perspective for the just transition, because we also need to reconfigure supply chains and shipping to design out waste and hyperconsumption from societies, which will require changes in global trade and shipping. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for your also very comprehensive presentation. Unfortunately, due to the fact that we're going to have to give the room back right now, I have to limit the concluding observations. I just wanted to check with Mr. Huang if he had one sentence or one very short comment before I give the final concluding sentences to the Special Rapporteur.
Yes, thank you, moderator. And I think many panelists referred to the Hong Kong Convention and expressed concern on the using of the beach method, the reef flagging issues. We are working on this, and as I mentioned earlier, that the entry into force of the convention provides good opportunity to improve the convention. We are also working hardly with the government of the relevant ship recycling states, and to get as many as possible ship recycling facility to be improved and be certified before the entry into force of the Hong Kong Convention. And some member states also refer to the safety and the environmental protection of the fishing vessels, and the issue of the marine plastic pellets issues. We are all working on these issues, and in concluding, I thank the host and the Special Rapporteur for his to invite IMO to speak at this side event, and we very much appreciate the recommendation from the Special Rapporteur, and we will forward this to the Council of the IMO to fully consider, to further consider and take action on this. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Huang. And the final word from the Special Rapporteur for us then to give the floor, give back the room to the next event.
Thank you very much, Yves, and thanks to all that have participated. So 3 very quick headline points on the issue of just transition. This is a question of how to do the transition. It is not a question of whether to do the transition. The transition needs to be done in so many issues. That's one thing. Second, on the point about shipbreaking and beaching, the transfer of hazardous waste to the developing world, also the dumping of what are persistent pollutants capable of long-range transport means that there's a global interest. Every country in the world has an interest in this matter. And third and finally, I very much welcome the IMO statement that the recommendations in my report some of them are already being acted upon, and the others are all being very carefully considered. Thank you very much.